Right, hello everyone and welcome to Medieval Chronicles. Get yourself a nice cup of tea and maybe a glass of wine, and we're going to settle into a reading on the Battle of Bannockburn. History gives us few defeats as complete or as daunting as the Battle of Bannockburn. It was June 1314. King Edward II of England marched north, his banners flying, his armies vast, tens of thousands strong. Knights and archers, nobles and men-at-arms, all advancing towards Stirling, where Robert the Bruce and his Scots awaited them. 2 days later, the English army was broken. The king himself led the field, and in that sudden reversal, the myth of English invincibility, the dream of conquest over Scotland, fell apart. But today we're not hearing this story from a modern historian. We're going to listen to a voice from the time itself, a contemporary witness. A man who lived in Edward's world, who knew its ambitions and its failures. The author of the Vita Edwardi Secundi, the life of Edward II. We don't know his name, though he is sometimes referred to as the so-called monk of Malmesbury. He may have been a royal clerk, perhaps someone close to the court. What we do know is that he wrote not to flatter, but to understand. His Vita isn't official propaganda. It's something far more unusual. It's an honest, sometimes ironic, sometimes sorrowful attempt to make sense of a king who seemed to drift between pride and weakness, surrounded by flatterers and divided nobles. In his account of Bannockburn, there's no thunderous battle rhetoric, no attempt to disguise the humiliation. Instead, we get a picture of disarray, of arrogance before the fight, panic during it, and shame after. He describes a realm that has lost its unity, a leadership that has forgotten its purpose. It's tempting reading this to see Bannockburn as just another battle, one of those turning points that fill history books. But in the Vita, it's more than that. It's a moral reckoning. The chronicler sees the defeat not as bad luck, but as the natural consequence of pride, folly, and discord. Think about what that means. This was an English writer working close to power, daring to say that his own country's failure was deserved, that the king's misjudgments had invited disaster. It's one of the earliest moments in English literature where history becomes introspection. And behind all the political detail, the text has a strange human sympathy. The writer doesn't gloat. He almost pities Edward, this uncertain king who wanted greatness but could not command loyalty, who sought glory in Scotland but found humiliation instead. As you listen to this passage, imagine it being written not for a crowd, but for a few quiet readers, men of court, priests, scribes, reflecting on the nature of kingship itself. The question beneath the words is one that still echoes today. What happens when a king loses the confidence of his people, and what, if anything, can restore it? Now, let's step back to that summer of 1314 and hear the Vita Edwardi Secundi's account of the Battle of Bannockburn, a voice from a world where honour, failure and fate were written in the same ink. About the beginning of Lent, 1314, messengers came to the king with the news of the destruction of the Scottish cities, the capture of the castles and the breaching of the surrounding walls. The Constable of Stirling came too, and pointed out to the king how he had been compelled by necessity to enter upon the truce. He persuaded the king to lead an army to Scotland to defend his castle and the country. When the king heard the news, he was very much grieved, and for the capture of his castles could scarcely restrain his tears. He therefore summoned the earls and barons to come to his aid and overcome the traitor who called himself king. The earls replied that it would be better for all to meet in Parliament and there unanimously decide what ought to be done in this matter rather than to proceed so inadvisedly. This, moreover, would be in accord with the ordinances. But the king said that the present business was very urgent and that he could not therefore wait for Parliament. The earls said that they would not fight without Parliament, lest it should happen that they infringed the ordinances. Some councillors and household officials therefore advised the king to demand their due service from all and set out boldly for Scotland. It was certain that so many would come to his aid that neither Robert Bruce nor the Scots would resist. What of the Earl of Gloucester, the Earl of Pembroke, the Earl of Hereford, Robert de Clifford, Hugh Despencer, and the King's household and the other barons in England? All these would come with their knights. There was no need to worry about the other earls. The king therefore demanded their due service from all, and ordered the necessary stores to be provided. The Earl of Pembroke he sent ahead with a force of knights to seek out the ambushes of the Scots, and prepare the king's route into Scotland. When all the necessaries had been collected, the king and the other magnates of the land, with a great multitude of carts and baggage wagons, set out for Scotland. When the Lord King had reached Berwick, he made a short halt there to await the arrival of the army. But the Earl of Lancaster, the Earl Warren, the Earl of Arundel, and the Earl of Warwick did not come, but sent knights equipped to do their due service for them in the army. On the 6th or 7th day, before the feast of St. John the Baptist, our king, with all his army, left Berwick, and took his way towards Stirling. The cavalry numbered more than 2,000, without counting a numerous crowd of infantry. There were in that company quite sufficient to penetrate the whole of Scotland, and some thought if the whole strength of Scotland had been gathered together, they would not have stayed to face the king's army. Indeed, all who were present agreed that never in our time has such an army gone forth from England. The multitude of wagons, if they had been placed end to end, would have taken up a space of 20 leagues. The king, therefore, took confidence and courage from so great and so distinguished a multitude, and hastened day by day to the appointed place. Not as if he was leading an army to battle, but as if he was going to St. James's. Brief were the halts for sleep, briefer still for food. Hence horses, horsemen, and infantry were worn out with toil and hunger, and if they did not bear themselves well, it was hardly their fault. The Earl of Gloucester and the Earl of Hereford commanded the first line. On Sunday, which was the vigil of St. John's Day, as they passed by a certain wood and were approaching Stirling Castle, the Scots were seen straggling under the trees as if in flight, and a certain knight, Henry de Bohun, pursued them with the Welsh to the entrance of the wood, for he had in mind that if he found Robert Bruce there, he would either kill him or carry him off captive. But when he had come thither, Robert himself came suddenly out of his hiding place in the wood, and the said Henry, seeing that he could not resist the multitude of Scots, turned his horse with the intention of regaining his companions. But Robert opposed him and struck him on the head with an axe that he carried in his hand. His squire, trying to protect and rescue his lord, was overwhelmed by the Scots. This was the beginning of their troubles. On the same day, a sharp action was fought in which the Earl of Gloucester was unhorsed and Robert de Clifford disgracefully routed, and though our men long pursued the Scots, many were killed on either side. The day being spent, the whole army met at the place where it was to bivouac that night. But there was to be no rest, for they spent it sleepless, expecting the Scots rather to attack by night than to await battle by day. When day came, it was abundantly clear that the Scots were prepared for the conflict with a great force of armed men. Wherefore our men, the veterans that is, and the more experienced, advised that we should not fight that day, but rather await the morrow, both on account of the importance of the feast and the toil that they had already undergone. This practical and honourable advice was rejected by the younger men as idle and cowardly. The Earl of Gloucester counselled the king not to go forth to battle that day, but to rest on account of the feast and let his army recuperate as much as possible. But the king spurred the earl's advice, and, growing very heated with him, charged him with treachery and deceit. "Today," said the earl, "it will be clear that I am neither a traitor nor a liar," and at once prepared himself for battle. Meanwhile, Robert Bruce marshalled and equipped his allies, gave them bread and wine, and cheered them as best he could. When he learned that the English line had occupied the field, he led his whole army out from the wood. About 40,000 men he brought with him, and split them into 3 divisions, and not one of them was on horseback, but each was furnished with light armour, not easily penetrated by a sword. They had axes at their sides, and carried lances in their hands. They advanced like a thick-set hedge, and such a phalanx could not easily be broken. When the situation was such that the two sides must meet, James Douglas, who commanded the first phalanx of the Scots, vigorously attacked the Earl of Gloucester's line. The Earl withstood him manfully, once and again penetrated their wedge, and would have been victorious if he had had faithful companions. But look! At a sudden rush of Scots, the Earl's horse is killed, and the Earl rolls to the ground. Lacking defenders, and borne down by the weight of his body armour, he could not easily arise, and of the 500 cavalry whom he had led to battle at his own expense, he almost alone was killed. For when they saw their lord unhorsed, they stood astonished and brought him no aid. Accursed be the chivalry whose courage fails in the hour of greatest need. Alas, 20 armed knights could have saved the Earl, but among some 500 there was not found one. May the Lord confound them. Some said that the Earl of Gloucester had perished suddenly by reason of his rash attack, for there was rivalry between him and the Earl of Hereford, who should take precedence in the line, and the Earl of Hereford said that this was lawfully his, because he was Constable of England. Gloucester replied that his forebears had always led the van, and therefore this pertained to him by custom. While they disputed in this fashion, and the Scottish forces were approaching rapidly, the Earl of Gloucester dashed forward in disorder, seeking the glory of the first encounter. But see, the Earl is met by the onrushing Scots, and his horse immediately killed, because when thrown from his horse, there was no one to defend him. He was pierced by many wounds and shamefully killed. Alas, 20 armed knights could have saved the Earl, but among some 500, not one was found to help. May the Lord confound them. Giles d'Argentine, a fighting soldier and very expert in the art of war, while in command of the king's reign, watched the fate of the Earl, hurried up in eager anxiety to help him, but could not. Yet he did what he could, and fell together with the Earl, thinking it more honourable to perish with so great a man than to escape death by flight. For those who fall in battle for their country are known to live in everlasting glory. On the same day, Robert de Clifford, William Marshal, famous, powerful and active knights, were overcome by the Scots and died in the field. When those who were with our king saw that the Earl's line was broken and his men ready to run, they said that it would be dangerous to tarry longer and safer for the king to retreat. At those remarks, the king quitted the field and hastened toward the castle. Moreover, when the royal standard was seen to depart, the whole army quickly dispersed. 200 knights and more, who had neither drawn their swords nor even struck a blow, were reduced to flight. O famous race, unconquered through the ages, why do you, who used to conquer knights, flee from mere footmen? At Berwick, Dunbar and Falkirk you carried off the victory, and now you flee from the infantry of the Scots. But whatever others may say, the hand of the Lord was not with you. Thus was Ben-Hadad, a most powerful king of Syria, put to flight by the footmen of the princes of Samaria. Thus, while our people fled, following in the king's footsteps, lo, a certain ditch entrapped many of them, and a great part of our army perished in it. The king, coming to the castle and thinking to find refuge there, was repulsed as if he were an enemy. The drawbridge was raised and the gate closed. Wherefore the castellan was thought by many to be not innocent of treason, and yet that very day he was seen in armour, arrayed for battle, as if to fight for the king. I neither absolve the Castilian nor accuse him of treachery, but I think it was God's doing that the King of England did not enter the castle. For if he had then been admitted, he would never have escaped capture. When the king saw that he was thus repulsed, and that no other refuge now remained to him, he turned his steps towards Dunbar, and coming there took ship. He landed with his following at the port of Berwick. Others, having no ship, came by land. The knights shed their armour and fled without it. The Scots continually harassed their rear. The pursuit lasted 50 miles. Many of our men perished, and many too were taken prisoner. For the inhabitants of the countryside, who had previously feigned peace, now slaughtered our men indiscriminately. Wherefore it was proclaimed by Sir Robert that they should take prisoners and hold them to ransom. So the Scots busied themselves with taking prisoner the magnates in order to extort large sums from them. There were captured the Earl of Hereford, John Gifford, John the Wineltone, John de Seagrave, Maurice de Berkeley, undoubtedly barons of great power, and many others whom it is not necessary to specify, of whom many agreed for their ransoms, and paying the money were set free. 500 and more were thought to be dead, who had taken captive and were later ransomed. Indeed, amongst all their misfortunes, this at least turned to the advantage of our army, that, while our people sought safety in flight, a great part of the Scottish army was occupied in plunder, because, if all the Scots alike had been attending to the pursuit of our men, few would have escaped. So, while Robert Bruce and his men attacked our baggage train, the greater part of the English came safe to Berwick. Indeed, I think it is unheard of in our time for such an army to be scattered so suddenly by infantry, unless when the flower of France fell before the Flemings at Courtrai, where the noble Count Robert of Artois was killed. O day of vengeance and disaster, day of utter loss and shame, evil and accursed day, not to be reckoned in our calendar, that blemished the reputation of the English, despoiled them and enriched the Scots, in which our costly belongings were ravished to the value of £200,000. So many fine noblemen and valiant youth, so many noble horses, so much military equipment, costly garments and gold plate, all lost in one unfortunate day, one fleeting hour. Perchance someone will ask why the Lord smote us this day, why we succumbed to the Scots, when for the last 20 years we have always had the better of them. Indeed, antiquity offers an example, and the acts of the Hebrews clearly provide a parallel. Xerxes was powerful king of the Medes when he waged war upon the Greeks with a numerous fleet and stubborn army, was scarcely allowed in defeat to escape with a single ship. Israel, fighting Benjamin for the crime committed in Gibeath, trusting in numbers and courage, was twice defeated in battle, twice put to flight before Benjamin. Thus, our men, who came in pride and insolence, returned in shame and rout. Assuredly, the proud arrogance of our men made the Scots rejoice in victory. Right, and so ends the monk of Malmesbury's account of Bannockburn. To the chronicler, this was not just a military defeat, it was a moral one. He looked at the wreckage of Edward's campaign and saw the reflection of a broken kingdom, nobles at odds, councillors corrupt, loyalty sold for favour. The battle, in his eyes, was simply the visible symptom of a deeper rot. What makes the Vita remarkable is its restraint. It doesn't rant. It doesn't sensationalise. Instead, it observes, coolly, sometimes painfully, how a great enterprise can fall apart when pride replaces prudence. You can almost hear the writer's sigh between the lines, a sense that Edward's wounds were self-inflicted, and that Bannockburn was less a punishment from heaven than a lesson ignored on earth. And yet there's something generous about this view. He doesn't deny Edward's humanity. He recognises that kings too are trapped in their own fears, their own illusions. There's compassion here, a kind of sorrowing wisdom, because to him, failure was not only political, it was personal. He also gives, perhaps reluctantly, a measure of respect to the Scots. He admits that their victory was earned through discipline, courage, and a belief in their cause. That must have been a bitter pill for an Englishman of the court to write, but it gives the Vita its enduring honesty. For us today, Bannockburn remains one of those moments that transcend borders, an event that exposes what happens when leadership falters and unity dissolves. The Vita Edwardi Secundi reminds us that the downfall of a kingdom doesn't come from a single lost battle, but from years of arrogance, neglect, and division. That's why, more than 700 years later, the Vita's voice still matters. It's not just medieval history. It's a meditation on human frailty, on how power without wisdom becomes its own defeat. Edward II would continue to reign for another 13 years, but after Bannockburn, his kingship was never the same. Trust had been broken. The shadow of that loss followed him to the end. For his anonymous chronicler, though, there was a kind of purpose in recording the disaster. By writing it down, he preserved not only the event, but the insight, that even the greatest can fall, and that sometimes it is in the falling that truth is revealed. This has been the Vita Edwardi Secundi, the Battle of Bannockburn, a story not just of defeat, but of understanding. Thank you for joining me here at Medieval Chronicles in exploring this remarkable passage in medieval history. I'd love to hear what you think. Did the Scots win at Bannockburn, or did the English lose? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let's keep the conversation going. Until the next time, may you continue to enjoy medieval history as we here at Medieval Chronicles continue uncovering the voices of the past through the pages of contemporary medieval documents. Best wishes, Terence for Medieval Chronicles. Goodbye and good night.